If you see a human, run. If a human sees you, pray. It didn't matter. The warning had spread across the stars, whispered in dimly lit back rooms and war councils alike. It seemed absurd. Of course, humans were small, weak by most galactic standards. The Draken could crush their bones with a single blow. The Valkyrie could outrun them with ease. The Tyus didn't even bother considering humans as a true warrior species. Yet here they were, sneaking through the ruins of a once thriving Federation colony, avoiding the one species that was somehow untouchable. Carthon, a seasoned enforcer of the W Syndicate, adjusted the plasma rifle on his back and surveyed the area. The colony had been wiped clean, just like the others. The Syndicate's assassins were efficient. No loose ends, no survivors. But they had learned the painful truth. Humans were an exception to the rule. His second-in-command, a massive Zark named Dulles, shifted uneasily. This place is dead. So why are we here? Carthon tapped the side of his helmet, feeding the mission briefing into his visor. Command says one human was registered here. The Syndicate wants confirmation. Why bother? Dulles grunted. We both know it's either gone or worse. It's still here. Carthon didn't reply. They both remembered the last mission, the one on VRA-9. It had seemed like a simple operation. A planetary governor had made the mistake of crossing the Syndicate. The assassins moved in, eliminating all security, shutting down the comm grid, clearing the compound. Then the reports started coming in. One assassin was missing, then another and another. When they found the bodies, the Syndicate nearly declared war on humanity. It wasn't just that they were dead. It was the way they died. The first had been impaled with a sharpened piece of their own armor. The second had their breathing apparatus turned inside out while still wearing it. The third, no one talked about the third. And no one ever found the human. Carthon motioned forward, and the squad advanced in formation. Dulles grumbled under his breath, probably a curse in his native tongue, but he followed. The colony's buildings stood silent, doors hanging open, lights flickering. The scent of ozone and burnt metal filled the air. Motion detected. Carthon froze. The words had come from his helmet scanner. Dulles tensed, lifting his rifle. Where? Dulles asked. Carthon didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his visor, zooming in on the coordinates. A heat signature, just one small humanoid. No, he whispered. It couldn't be. The Syndicate had sent an entire team ahead of them, professionals who made a living making targets disappear. Yet here they were, staring at proof that at least one human remained. Dulles exhaled slowly. Orders. Stay quiet. Stay alert. They moved toward the source, each step careful, boots barely making a sound. The signal led them to a maintenance corridor near the colony's power core. The walls were splattered with old blood. Carthon counted at least 5 Syndicate insignias carved into the metal, marks from their previous team. A door at the end of the corridor was ajar. The scanner pulsed. The human was inside. Carthon switched to thermal vision. Something moved. He signaled for Dulles to take the left flank. 2 other operatives positioned themselves on either side of the door. They had numbers, training, and firepower. There was no reason to be afraid, except for the fact that they had been here before. And they had lost. Carthon gave the signal. The door slid open. The room was dark, save for the flickering emergency lights. It had once been a storage area, but the crates were overturned, equipment scattered. At the center, sitting on a crate, was the human. He wasn't armed. He didn't move. Carthon tightened his grip on his rifle. Identify yourself, he commanded. The human lifted his head. He was young, unremarkable, wearing a tattered jumpsuit with a Federation patch on the sleeve. You're late, the human said. Carthon hesitated. Late for what? The human smiled. Then the lights went out. A metallic snap echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable hiss of venting gas. Carthon barely had time to realize what was happening before something moved in the darkness. A choked gurgle came from his left. Dullas! Carthon spun, activating his visor to night mode, but the feed cut out. Static, a flicker of movement, a shadow in the dark. Then the screams began. He fired. Plasma bolts lit up the room in brief, stuttering flashes. Shadows danced. Shapes flickered. The human was gone. Something brushed past him. His instincts screamed. He turned. Pain exploded in his chest. His breath hitched. He staggered, dropping to one knee. His fingers touched his armor, feeling something warm seeping through. A voice whispered in his ear, "You should have run." Then everything went black. Carthon woke with a sharp inhale, his lungs straining against something tight. His body refused to move the way he expected. Pain lanced through his ribs as he tried to shift. He was restrained. The darkness around him was absolute, but the cold metal beneath him told him he was still somewhere inside the colony. His helmet was gone. His weapons were gone. His squad was silent. A breath, not his own, came from somewhere close. "You're awake," the human's voice said, calm and unhurried. Carthon's pulse quickened. He had faced warlords, mercenary captains, and bounty hunters with kill counts spanning entire planets. None had ever made him feel the way this moment did. The thing crawling up his spine. He kept his voice steady. "Where am I?" "A room," came the mocking answer. Carthon forced himself to take slow breaths. Losing control was the quickest way to die. "My men, they're here?" he asked. The human's response was delayed. Then came the answer. Somewhere, Carthon clenched his jaw. "Are they alive?" A pause. Then the human's voice again. "You're asking the wrong question." Carthon worked against the restraints, shifting his wrists. They were secured to something solid. Metal cuffs digging into his skin, with no slack to work with. He still couldn't see, but he could hear the human moving, slow, deliberate steps circling him. "Why are we alive?" Carthon asked. Another pause. Then the human chuckled. "Now you're thinking." Carthon stayed still, listening. There was something unsettling in the way the human spoke. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't desperate. He was in control, and he knew it. "You're with the Syndicate," the human said. "That means you're professionals." "Which means someone paid a lot to have me dead," Carthon thought. He didn't respond. He wasn't about to give anything away. The human continued, "Here's the thing. Your people never learn. You send assassins, they don't come back. You send more, same story, and yet you keep trying." A chair scraped against the floor as the human sat. "That's the definition of insanity, isn't it?" Carthon had heard the phrase before. Humans love their old sayings. "What are you?" he asked. The human laughed softly. "The only thing keeping you alive right now." It wasn't a complete answer, but it wasn't a lie either. Carthon tested his restraints again, searching for any weakness. Nothing. "Who hired you?" the human asked. Carthon didn't respond. The chair creaked as the human leaned forward. "Come on. You're Syndicate. You know how this works. Information for survival." Carthon exhaled through his nose. He had no reason to believe this human would let him go, no matter what he said. But stalling was better than silence. "You already know," Carthon said. "Why ask?" "Because I like hearing it," the human said. Carthon clenched his jaw. "The High Council?" "Which one?" "The Galactic Federation." A low whistle. "So it's official now," Carthon said, but didn't speak further. "Let me guess," the human continued. "They figured I was too dangerous, too much of a problem. Best to clean up loose ends before things spiral." He sighed. Predictable. Carthon listened closely. The human was talking, which meant he was distracted. If Carthon could pick up anything, any weakness, any opening, he could turn the situation around. "They've been trying to erase us for years," the human went on. "First they tried politics, then economic pressure, then covert teams like yours. Each time they failed, and each time they lost more control, Carthon's mind worked through the implications. This wasn't just about one human. "They're afraid of you," he said. The human exhaled. "You say that like it isn't obvious. They have armies, fleets. They could wipe Earth off the map." "They could," the human agreed, "but they won't. Because they know what happens next." Carthon frowned. "What happens next?" A shift in the dark, then the human's voice, lower and almost amused. "You're a smart guy, Carthon. You tell me." Carthon replayed everything he knew, the failed assassinations, the disappearances, the rumors. And now a human sitting here talking to him like he was already dead. He swallowed. "You're not alone." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Then the human admitted, "No, I'm not." Carthon stiffened. "They think we're scattered," the human continued, "that we've isolated ourselves, that we're easy to pick off, one by one. But we're not. We're watching. We're waiting. And when the time comes..." The words trailed off. Carthon strained his ears, picking up faint movement in the distance. Not just a human, something else. Others. More than one. Carthon's stomach tightened. "Your syndicate thinks they're the apex predators," the human said. "They're wrong." Carthon took a slow breath. "What do you want from me?" "Simple," the human stood. "A message." Carthon felt his restraints loosen. Not entirely. Just enough for him to realize he was being let go. "You tell your bosses," the human said, "no more assassins. No more syndicate. No more games." Carthon felt his hands come free. He pulled them forward, rubbing the feeling back into his fingers. The room was still dark. "And if they don't listen?" Carthon asked. The human didn't answer right away, then said one word. "They will." With that, the lights flickered back on. Carthon blinked against the sudden brightness. The human was gone. Carthon's hands twitched as sensation returned to his fingers. The restraints were off, but he didn't move right away. His instincts screamed at him. This was a test. The human had vanished, but that didn't mean he was safe. The fact that he was still alive meant the game wasn't over. "Dulles," Carthon called. A groan came from somewhere nearby. Carthon turned his head, his vision still adjusting to the light. His second-in-command, Dulles, was slumped against a far wall, bruised but breathing. Two other squad members were on the floor, unconscious but alive. The rest were missing. Carthon forced himself to stand. Every part of him wanted to run. Every part of him wanted to get off this planet, and as far away from this human as possible. But something stopped him. They had lost completely. Not just a mission, not just a team. They had lost control. Carthon pressed a hand to his ribs, where the wound had been. The pain was still there, but it wasn't fatal. The human had chosen to let him go. That meant something. "Dulles, where is it?" Carthon muttered. Dulles winced as he sat up. "And we're still alive?" Carthon didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the door, stepping cautiously over their unconscious squad mates. His rifle and gear were gone, just as expected. The human hadn't left them unarmed out of kindness. It was another message. They weren't a threat. That stung more than Carthon wanted to admit. Dulles stood, shaking his head. "We have to report this." Carthon glanced at him. "And say what?" Dulles hesitated. That the target escaped. Carthon exhaled. That's not what happened. They both knew it. The mission hadn't just failed. The Syndicate had been played. Carthon opened the door, expecting an ambush, but the corridor was empty. He motioned for Dulles to follow. They moved quickly, checking corners, listening for movement. The colony was still dead silent, but it didn't feel abandoned. They weren't alone. The docking bay was where they left it. Their transport still waiting untouched. That only made Carthon more uneasy. The human could have destroyed it. He could have sabotaged it. But instead, he had left their escape route open. A warning. Dulles keyed in the access code, and the ship's ramp lowered. The moment they stepped inside, Carthon locked the doors behind them. Dulles fell into the pilot seat, fingers moving over controls. "We leaving?" Carthon didn't argue. The engines hummed to life. The ship rose smoothly above the ruined colony. The moment they broke atmosphere, Dulles set course for the nearest Syndicate outpost. Neither of them spoke for a while. Carthon sat in the co-pilot seat, staring at the swirling void outside. "Do you think they'll listen?" Dulles asked. Carthon snorted. "No." He closed his eyes for a moment. "That's a problem." Dulles gripped the controls tighter. "They'll just send another team. They'll lose another team," Carthon said. Dulles didn't respond. Carthon exhaled. He had been in this business long enough to know how people thought. The Syndicate would assume this was an anomaly. They would assume the human got lucky, that the next squad would be smarter, stronger, more prepared. They would keep sending assassins, and they would keep losing them. Carthon drummed his fingers against his armrest. What happens when the humans get tired of playing defense? Dulles stiffened. They both knew the answer. The Syndicate thought of itself as untouchable. They ran the shadows, controlled governments, dictated the fate of planets. But there had never been a species that turned their assassins into prey until now. The Syndicate wouldn't stop, and that meant this wasn't over. Carthon leaned forward, activating the ship's comm system. "What are you doing?" Dulles asked. Carthon sent a coded transmission. "Buying time." Dulles frowned. "You think you can convince them?" "No," Carthon admitted. "But maybe I can make them hesitate." Dulles exhaled sharply. "That's not how the Syndicate works." Carthon shook his head. "No, but it's how the humans work." Dulles didn't argue. The ship continued through the void, leaving the colony behind. But Carthon had the sinking feeling that no matter how far they went, they had already crossed a line they couldn't step back from. And the Syndicate wasn't ready for what came next.